Okay guys, here's a history question, especially for the millennials. What's the most powerful factory-rated small block GM ever produced? I'm talking about the Gen 1 stuff, not the ZR1 motor. How about a 375 horse 327 back in 1965? The Fuelie vet motor. What if I told you you could go down to the wrecking yard, pick up a 5.3 liter LM7 and make every bit as much power as the most powerful factory-rated small block ever produced? Interested? In this video, we compare the most powerful small block ever produced. That's the 375 horse 327 L84 fuel-injected Corvette motor. And we compare it to its modern equivalent, which is basically a 300 horsepower LM7 5.3 liter. It's impressive, the comparison between the two. Now, as luck would have it, I had previously built a 365 horse version of this motor. So it was a complete 327 done to factory specs, and the difference is it had the high-rise dual plane intake and 780 Holley carburetor. I also ran that. But as luck would have it, I also had a friend that was restoring a Rochester fuel injection for a Corvette owner. And he was nice enough to come down to the dyno and help us install it, and more importantly, tune it. As it turned out, tuning the Rochester fuel injection is a lot more difficult than we thought. And I can see why a lot of guys replaced it with simple carburation. But the interesting thing is you can go down to the wrecking yard for about $200 or $300, especially on sale weekends, pick up a 5.3 liter LM7 and make every bit as much power as the most powerful small block 327 ever produced. So that's pretty impressive for the LS guys. But guess what? Just as time and technology has marched on, making that LM7 every bit as good as the most powerful small block ever produced, time and technology has made an even newer version. Of course, we're talking about the L83 Direct-Injected 5.3. And guess what? It's every bit as impressive. Before we get to our test results, I'm going to take a look at some of the specs on each one of the three motors we're trying to compare. We'll put them up right here. We're going to take a look at the displacement, the compression, the bore and stroke, the cam timing, and maybe a little bit about the induction system. We're not going to go into great detail, but a little something that's just so we can discuss all of this. So if we take a look at that 375 horse 327, we've got a factory Rochester fuel injection. Obviously it's mechanical injection, whereas the LM7 and the L83 are electronic fuel injection. And that's not a big deal, although as we found out, it's much more difficult to tune the Rochester fuel injection because all of the mechanical components were designed to feed a specific motor. Now, obviously with the electronic fuel injection, if we adjust the pulse width and we can change the timing and stuff, we can tune it for other combinations. That's much harder with the mechanical injection. Now, if we take a look at the cylinder heads, the legendary Fuelie heads are actually what's limiting that combination from making more power. I mean, we can make a little bit more with those heads, but if you take a look at the flow rate of a Fuelie head compared to the 706 head that's used in the LM7 or the L83 head, it's not even close. All of the later heads flow much more, which is why they're able to make much more power. So the legendary Fuelie heads were good back in the day. They're nothing compared to a modern head. And if you compare them to an even better head, like an LS3 head, for instance, they're probably down like 100 CFM per hole. So Fuelie heads, good back then, but not great now. The one thing I want you to take a look at is the cam timing. If we compare the cam timing, I mean, if you look at an LM7, it's less than 200 degrees at 50, which means it's pretty tame. It was designed to produce low speed power, which is part of why when you combine that with the runner length and the intake manifold, it produces power at such a low RPM. It's designed for a truck and towing. But if you look at the cam timing on that 30-30 cam, it's like 40 or 50 degrees more than these other cams that we're taking a look at. So it's designed to rev. Unfortunately, I think that, and it does rev, you can see it pulls out to 7,000 no problem. It makes peak power lower than that, but that's because we've got a high RPM cam teamed with a dual plane intake. And the dual plane, even though it's a high rise, no, I take that back, combined with that factory fuel injection, with the Rochester fuel injection, but it actually has a fair bit of runner length. It's kind of like a mini tunnel ram with a side mount for the throttle body. So when it's combined with that injection system, it's just not designed to run at real high RPM. I think that this that camshaft would actually be better teamed with like a single plane intake manifold with short runners on it to allow it to rev. So it's got a lot of camshaft in it. It's also, if we take a look at the compression, I mean the static compression on this muscle car motor was 11-to-1. On the LM7, it's only 9.5-to-1. It's much higher on the L83, and they can get away with that. That's because they're using direct injection. It's hard to get it's hard to get the mixture to pre-ignite if there's no mixture there until the very last second, which is awesome for the direct injection stuff. High compression, more efficiency, better fuel mileage, all that stuff works well, especially when you team it with variable cam timing, which they did, and as we'll see, it has a dramatic effect on the torque curve. Not only does it make me more peak power, but it basically makes more power everywhere through the entire curve. So the 327 has more displacement, more compression, more cam timing. It has a pretty good induction system that works fairly well, although it's difficult to tune, and yet it still doesn't make the power that this LM7 or certainly this L83. But enough talking. Let's get to the results. We can compare them all and see how they did. Okay, we'll get things started with the power curve on our high performance muscle car 327. This is actually a 365 horse, an L76 version. And the reason I have this one up is because we ran it at the same time as we ran the fuel injected version. And here's why I'm posting this one. If we take a look at the fuel injected version, we come up with this. And as you can see, the fuel injected version definitely does make more power, which is kind of what we expected compared to the carbureted version. I mean, 375 horse versus 365 horse. But as you can see, it was a nightmare to get it tuned. We never, no matter what we did, this expert who modified the fuel injection and rebuilt it and got it running perfectly, we were never able to tune this thing to have the air fuel right through the entire curve. It was lean down low and in the middle, and then it was pig rich at the top, and there's really nothing that we could do to get it to be right. So we'll go ahead and use the curve for the carbureted version, and just know that the fuel injected version probably would make a little bit more power, 10 or 15 more horsepower, but even at that, it actually does not make the rated power output of 375 horse. Even though those were gross ratings by GM, run under optimized conditions, which is actually what we did here with long tube headers, and we dialed in the carburetor in this case and tried to dial in the fuel injection. It was, the water temperature was low. Basically everything was designed to make as much power as we could from that combination, but it still didn't make the rated power output. So this is the 327. Now let's see what happens when we add our Junkyard 5.3 liter to the mix. This is our super double throwdown 365 horse 327, because the 375 horse version we had problems with the tuning. We use this curve because it revved out real nice, had a good air fuel curve. Now let's compare this to a Junkyard 5.3 liter. We went down the wrecking yard, got an LM7, basically put headers on it, tuned it, has just run just the same way that this one does, so we could do it as a back-to-back thing. We ran it with an electric water pump, long tube headers, and an optimized tune. This is our 5.3 liter. As you can see, it's a truck motor, so it was designed to make a lot more torque, which it did. The 327 made a peak of 368, 369 foot-pounds. And the 5.3 liter made 384 foot-pounds. Basically made more torque everywhere, all the way through to 5,500 RPM, which was the crossover point. Now with that 30-30 cam, the 327 was able to, continue to rev out farther. I mean, it has another 50 degrees of duration on the camshaft, so it was able to kind of continue the RPM, which it did. It did very well. The mild cam and long runner intake on the 5.3 liter obviously kind of signed off early, but really, if you race these things, the race might be over before it even started, because the other one, the 5.3, has so much more torque. And besides, this is a stock motor. But it's interesting that this thing made, the 327 produced 356 horsepower, so a little bit short of the 365 that it was rated at. And the 5.3 liter produced 353, so you're kind of splitting hairs there in terms of peak power. It just, the 5.3 made it a lot earlier in the RPM range. It probably is more usable, unless you really want to rev it, but then you could take the 5.3 and put a camshaft in it, and you still would not have spent anywhere near what the fuel injected motor is worth, because a rebuilt factory Rochester fuel injection that's in good condition and is a numbers matching deal and stuff costs more than it would for you to build an entire car. If you take a look at what Matt did over at Sloppy, his whole build to go out and run 8s costs less than it would cost to have a rebuilt factory Rochester fuel injection. That gives you an idea. Now let's take a look and see what happens when we ran an L83, new direct injected 5.3. Okay, we've got the power curves for our L76 365 horse 327 and our LM7 5.3 liter. Now let's add the final bit of technology here. As we can see, technology marches on, and basically the truck Junkyard 5.3 is kind of every bit as good as or makes as much peak power and more torque than the legendary muscle car motor. But here's an interesting thing. Let's take a look and see what happens when we add the direct-injected L83 and run on the same dyno, same air-fuel timing, same as zero electric water pump, and this one also had headers on it. Look at that. That's a dramatic difference. I mean, that's how much better that, even though it has the same displacement, that's how much better things like direct injection, variable cam timing, more compression. I don't know how the cylinder heads compare. I would think, haven't seen the flow rates yet on the L83 heads. I know that they don't flow as well as the LT1 stuff, but I think that they're still pretty good. And the intake, I'm sure, is very good. Probably more TBSS than early truck like this LM7 was. But all of that stuff combines to make a heck of a combination. I mean, I did a comparison before where I compared this L83 actually to an LQ4 6-liter, and it's almost like spot on. So this 5.3 with direct injection and variable cam timing makes power and torque like a 6-liter LS. That's how good it is. So there you have it. Technology marches on. The original 327, good. The LM7 truck motor, every bit as good, although it doesn't rev as high. And now the L83, even better. And imagine what's going to happen in the next 10 or 20 years. Okay, let me go out on a limb here. I'm going to predict that all the LS guys are going to talk trash to all the boomer Gen 1 small block guys. And maybe they should. I mean, take a look. You can go down to the wrecking yard, pick up a motor for 300 bucks, and it makes as much power as the most powerful small block ever produced. But here's something I want you to think about. A guy that has a fuel-injected 375 horse 327 in his Corvette really doesn't care that you get to go to the wrecking yard and pick up a $300 motor. He's doing just fine. And the other thing to think about, when you guys that are going down the wrecking yard, and believe me, I'm one of you, there's nothing I love more than going down to the wrecking yard, picking up a 5.3, putting it on the dyno, running it. I'm always amazed at how much power you can make with a cam and springs or boost or whatever we do to it. It's amazing. Power is so easy right now. But here's what you should think about. Your kids, when they're going down to the wrecking yard in the future and getting LT motors, they're going to laugh at you the same way you're laughing at the Gen 1 stuff, because their stuff is a lot better than the current LS stuff. Just something to think about. I also want to bring something else up. I keep mentioning the fact that the 327 is the most powerful small block ever produced. The reality is it's not. It's just the highest rated. I mean, there are other combinations that also made power. I've tested all of the legendary small blocks, but there's one that I didn't test because it's so hard to come by. You just don't find it anywhere. And that's the last version of the small block that they made before they converted to the LS. That's the LT1, the other LT1, not the 1971 and not the current one. It's the other LT1. And that came out actually as the LT4 version, which was the final version. And I think that they rated that at 330 or 340 horsepower. Now again, that is a net rating and not a gross rating like the 375 horse 327. So it certainly made a lot more power than that 327. I don't know how much, and they're really hard to find. You won't go find them at wrecking yards, which is why I didn't include it, but I wanted to give it at least an honorable mention. Thanks for watching, guys. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. Let me know what you think about this. Thanks for watching.